The cold Harmattan wind howled through the cracked louvers of a small bungalow in Oyo town as 10-year-old Ife sat alone on the front steps, her eyes wide with confusion and exhaustion. Her small fingers clutched the frayed hem of her faded Ankara dress, and her bare feet were caked with red dust from sweeping the compound since 5 a.m. Inside, her stepmother, Madam Shade, paced the sitting room like a caged lioness. "You think you read better than my own children because your mother left you this long hair and light skin." Madam Shade spat, her voice dripping venom as she glared at the little girl through the open door. Ife said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was armor, but that night was different. Long after the house fell quiet, when Ife lay curled on a thin raffia mat in the corridor banished from the room her step-siblings shared, Madam Shade slipped out into the darkness. A tall man waited by the gate, his left eye bisected by a jagged scar that caught the moonlight. He wore polished leather boots and a silver chain that glinted against his dark shirt. "She's asleep," Madam Shade whispered, her hands trembling with greed more than fear. "Do whatever you like with her. Just pay what we agreed." The man said nothing. He simply handed her a fat brown envelope. She didn't count it. She kicked, she screamed into the calloused palm, but no one came. Madam Shade snored theatrically behind her locked door. Ife was dragged into the night like a sack of gari. Just like that, she vanished. The next morning, when neighbors asked, Madam Shade wailed theatrically, beating her chest. "I woke up and she was gone. Maybe she went to her mother's grave." Crocodile tears rolled down her cheeks. No one suspected. A child had been sold like a bag of beans, and the world moved on. What happened to Ife that night? Who was the scarred man? The truth stayed buried for years until fate dragged it screaming into the light. The journey was long, silent, and soaked in terror. Ife sat in the back of a dusty Peugeot 504, tears carving clean lines through the dust on her face. The scarred man drove without once looking back. Hours later, they arrived at a lonely compound outside Ibadan high walls. Tall Iroko trees, no neighbors for miles. The gate groaned open like a dying animal. Inside the house smelled of damp and old paint. The man locked the door and finally spoke. "You'll work here. Cook, clean, fetch water. No noise, no questions. Behave, and you eat. Misbehave." He let the threat hang. Ife stared, too terrified to blink. In that moment, she understood. Her old life was dead. From then on, she became a ghost. Up before cockcrow, scrubbing floors till her knees bled, fetching water from the well till her shoulders screamed, cooking for a man who never said thank you. No school, no friends, no name. He called her girl. The man's name was Baba Lani, and though he rarely beat her, the promise of violence kept her obedient. One afternoon, while cleaning his study, Ife found a torn newspaper wedged between dusty books. Her heart stopped. On the front page was her mother, Mrs. Abimbola Onabanjo, smiling beside the headline, "Textile Queen dies in crash. Buried fortune locked in legal battle." Ife's hands shook so hard the paper rustled. She had never been told the full story. Madame Shade always changed the subject. But now pieces clicked. Her mother had owned Onabanjo Textiles, one of the biggest fabric companies in Ogun State. Everything was meant to pass to her only child, 18. That was why Madam Shade sold her. Not because she was a burden, because she was an heiress. But why had Babaloni agreed to hide her? Was he waiting until she turned 18, too? What? Kill her? Marry her off? A colder fear took root, laced with fierce curiosity. That night, lying on the cold kitchen floor, Ife whispered to the darkness, "I will survive this. I will find out everything. And one day, I will go back." She did not know someone else had already begun asking dangerous questions. 5 years passed. 15-year-old Ife was taller now, all sharp angles and watchful eyes. She no longer cried. She watched, waited, and searched. Every night when Babaloni's snores rattled the roof, she crept into the study, rifling drawers for anything that might free her. One evening, behind piles of junk in the store, she found a shiny metal box. The lock was cheap. A spoon and stubbornness broke it. Inside were files, bank statements, envelopes. One envelope bore the letterhead Onabanjo Holdings. Another was addressed to Mr. Deo Onabanjo, her uncle, her mother's younger brother. Her breath caught. Monthly payments had been wired to Baba Loni from a trust linked to her mother's estate. Someone was paying him to keep her hidden, someone who knew she was alive. That night, Ife decided she would run. But before she could, everything changed. A sharp knock thundered at the gate. Baba Loni was away in the village. Ife froze, heart hammering. "I'm looking for Ifalua Onabanjo," a voice shouted. No one had spoken her full name in 5 years. She crept to the window. A well-dressed man in a brown suit stood outside, holding a photograph. Beside him was a younger man scanning the compound like a hawk. Ife's legs moved before her mind caught up. She bolted for the back door, but Baba Loni's motorcycle roared in at that exact moment. "Thief!" he roared, leaping off. "Get back here!" Ife screamed, sprinting for the gate. "Help me!" The man in the suit turned, his face crumpled. "Ife," he called, voice cracking. Baba Loni lunged, knife flashing. Chaos erupted. Uncle Deo shoved Ife behind him. The younger man, Inspector Beo, drew a pistol. "Police, drop it." Baba Loni spat blood and curses. "She's mine. I fed her, clothed her. She's my niece." Deo roared, voice breaking. "You stole 10 years of her life." Deo pulled Ife into his arms. She buried her face in his shirt and sobbed for the first time in years. "Why did it take so long?" she whispered. "We were told you ran away," he said, voice thick with guilt. "I searched for years. I never stopped believing you were alive. When the private investigator finally traced the payments, I came myself." That night, Ife left the compound forever. The family house in Lagos was everything the prison had not been. Bright walls, laughter, soft beds. Aunt Ronk cried so hard she nearly fainted. Cousins Tola and Dara stared in awe at the sister they'd never met. They fed her jollof rice and fried fish until her stomach hurt. They bathed her, clothed her, tucked her into a bed that smelled of detergent and safety. For the first time in a decade, Ife slept without dreaming of locked gates. Weeks later, Uncle Deo sat her down. "Your mother's will is clear," he said gently. "Everything on Abanjo Textiles, the houses, the accounts is yours. We just had to find you." Ife stared. "I don't know how to run a company." "You won't be alone," Aunt Ronk promised. Therapy helped. School helped. Slowly, the flinches lessened. Laughter came easier. Ife wrote at night pages, and pages of pain and survival. One day she showed Uncle Deo a story titled "The Girl Behind the Gate." He read it with tears in his eyes. "You're going to change the world with this voice," he said. "But peace is fragile." A letter arrived from Kirikiri prison, Babalani. Ife's fingers shook as she opened it. "You think it's over?" "It's not. I was only the keeper. Ask your dear uncle why it took 10 years. Ask who received the first trust payment after your mother died. Ask who benefits if you never came back." That night she confronted Uncle Deo. "Is it true?" He aged 10 years in a breath. "After your mother died, everything was chaos. Lawyers, banks, reporters. Shade convinced everyone you'd run away. I was drowning. When the trust checks kept coming and you were missing, I put the money in a separate account. I told myself if you were dead, it would go to charity. I never touched a kobo for myself, but I stopped searching as hard as I should have. I failed you." Ife stared at him for a long time. "I don't hate you," she said finally, "but trust is earned twice now." He nodded, eyes wet. "Fair." She stood taller. "I'll take my name back, and I'll do it my way." By her 16th birthday, Ife was unrecognizable. She gave interviews not as a victim, but as a survivor. Onabanjo Textiles rose again under her leadership, now famous for employing rescued girls, teaching them tailoring, giving them futures. Then came the final twist. In her mother's old journal, Ife found a photograph, her mother beaming beside a younger Madame Shade, arms around each other. University days, 1998. An entry read, "Shade says she's happy for my success, but sometimes her smile doesn't reach her eyes. I hope it's nothing. She's my oldest friend." The betrayal had roots deeper than anyone imagined. At Madame Shade's trial in Ibadan High Court, Ife sat in the front row, natural hair in a neat afro puff, wearing a dress made from Onabanjo fabric. Shade was brought in wearing prison uniform, once proud face, now hollow. Evidence poured out. Bank transfers, Baba Loni's confession, witnesses who had seen Shade hand over the child that night. The judge's sentence was swift: 22 years for child trafficking, fraud, conspiracy. As Shade was led away, she hissed, "Your mother had everything. I deserved some of it." Ife looked her in the eye. "You only delayed what was already mine." She never looked back. Years later, under the mango tree of her own compound in Lekki, Ife launched the gatekeepers, foundation shelters, scholarships, legal aid for trafficked children. At the opening of the new Onabanjo factory, she stood before cameras and said the words the nation would never forget. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. Inspector Bayo now just Bayo visited Orphan. One evening he brought the final court document that restored her full name and closed every file. "It's really over," he said softly. Ife smiled, the Lagos breeze lifting her hair. "No," she answered. "It's just beginning." She was no longer the little girl behind the gate. She was the woman who tore it down and built an empire on the other side. If you were moved by Ife's story, comment your favorite part, share with someone who needs hope, and follow for more stories of unbreakable spirits. The sun was setting over the Atlantic when Efaloa Onabanjo, now 21, stepped out of the glass doors of Onabanjo House, the new 10-story headquarters of what had become Nigeria's most celebrated textile and empowerment brand. The building itself was a statement, walls clad in bold Ankara prints that changed with every new collection, solar panels shaped like a dia motifs, a rooftop garden where rescued girls learned to dye fabric under the sky. She wore a simple white kaftan made from the factory's resilience line, the one that carried her mother's old signature pattern on the inside hem, hidden, like strength often is. Bayo was waiting by the car, no longer in police uniform. He had resigned 2 years ago to head security and investigations for the Gatekeepers Foundation. Some habits never leave. He still scanned every corner before opening the door for her. "Madame CEO," he teased. Inspector turned bodyguard. She shot back, smiling. They had been dancing around something deeper for years, too afraid to name it. Tonight felt different. They drove in comfortable silence to Freedom Beach, a private stretch the Foundation had bought and turned into a safe space for survivors. The tide was low, the sky bleeding orange and violet. "I got a call today," she said quietly. Bayo tensed. "From where?" "Kirikiri Maximum. Madam Shade wants to see me. One supervised visit. She says she's dying. Cancer." Bayo's jaw tightened. "You don't owe her anything, Ife." "I know." She stared at the waves. "But I'm not going for her. That everything she tried to steal became the foundation of who I am." He exhaled slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." 2 weeks later, the prison visiting room smelled of bleach and despair. Madam Shade sat on the other side of the scratched plexiglass, thinner, grayer, an orange scarf tied weakly around her bald head. Ife sat. She did not pick up the phone at first. She simply looked. Finally she lifted the receiver. "You came," Shade rasped. "I'm not here for absolution," Ife said, voice calm, almost gentle. "I'm here to tell you that I read every journal my mother wrote about you. I know you were her friend before you were her poison. I know you sat in her hospital room when she was pregnant with me and smiled while planning how to take everything the moment she was gone. I know you sold me for 250,000 naira, less than the price of a plot of land in Ikorodu." Shade's lips trembled. "I just want you to understand something," Ife continued. "That money you took, I turned it into scholarships for 300 girls last year alone. The compound where you sent me, I bought it. It's now a gatekeeper's shelter called Hope House. Children sleep in the room where I once cried myself to sleep. They laugh there now. You lost, Shade. You lost the day you decided. Envy was stronger than love." Shade's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Your mother had everything," she whispered. "Beauty, money, love. You had her friendship," Ife said, "and you murdered it." She stood. She never looked back. Outside the prison gates, Bayo was waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He simply opened his arms. They stood there a long time while the Harmattan wind blew dust across the yard. Later that year, on the 5th anniversary of her rescue, Ife launched the book everyone had been waiting for, The Girl Behind the Gate, a memoir. It sold out in 3 hours. President of Nigeria sent a congratulatory tweet. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Everyone wanted the girl who turned trauma into an empire. But the moment that broke the internet happened at the Lagos book signing. A woman in her late 50s walked up to the table, trembling, holding a copy. When Ife looked up, her breath caught. The woman had her mother's eyes. "I am Sod's younger sister," the woman said, voice shaking. "I cut her off the day I heard what she did to you. But there's something you need to know. Something she told me before the cancer took her voice." Ife froze. "Your mother's accident." "It wasn't an accident. Shade was in the car behind her that night. She confessed it to me last month, begging me to tell no one. But I can't carry that secret to my grave." The room spun. Bayo caught Ife before her knees gave way. 3 months later, the case was reopened. The truck driver, now old and sickly, confessed on his hospital bed in exchange for medical care. Phone records, bank transfers, a witness who had stayed silent out of fear. Everything lined up. Madame Shade died in custody 2 weeks before the new charge of murder could be added. But justice still came. Her name was stripped from every honor, every street, every story. The newspapers called it the final reckoning. Ife did not celebrate. She stood at her mother's grave in Ayton Cemetery and laid a wreath made from the very first fabric her mother ever designed. "I finished it, Mummy," she whispered. "It's over." That night she and Bayo finally stopped dancing. Under the same mango tree where she once dreamed of freedom, he went down on one knee. "I've loved you since the day you ran toward that gate, screaming for help," he said. She cried, the good kind, and said yes. 1 year later, their wedding was small, held at Hope House, the compound that once imprisoned her. 300 girls in matching Ankara dresses formed a guard of honor. Uncle Deo walked her down the aisle, eyes shining with pride and unshed tears. Aunt Ronk bawled through the entire ceremony. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, a little voice piped up from the back. "I do." A 7-year-old girl named Kioma, rescued only 6 months earlier, marched forward holding a bouquet bigger than her head. "I object, because Sister Ife promised to read me 3 stories tonight." The whole gathering roared with laughter. Ife scooped the child up and kissed her forehead. "For stories," she promised, and she kept her word. 10 years after that, Onabanjo Textiles was valued at over 40 billion naira, fully women-owned, fully supported. Ife and Bayo had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The eldest daughter was named Abimbola. The middle girl was named Ronk. The boy, born on the exact anniversary of Ife's rescue, was named Deo. Every December 15th, the entire family returned to the old compound outside Ibadan. They no longer called it a prison. They called it the beginning. There, under the same iroko trees that once hid her tears, Ife gathered the newest rescues, sat them in a circle, and told them the only truth that ever mattered. "They will try to bury you, but some of us are seeds, and seeds were born to break the earth open." Then she would smile, touch the gate that no longer had a lock, and add, "Welcome home." 15 years later, 2045, the sun rose red over the Atlantic, the kind of red that makes old women say blood is coming. But in Lagos it only meant another hot December. Ifeoluwa Onabanjo Bello, she had taken Bayo's name quietly, the way strong women sometimes do, stood on the balcony of the house she and Bayo built on a quiet close in Banana Island. 50 years old now, but the camera still loved her, the same wide eyes, the same calm fire. Below her, the compound was already alive. 3 of the gatekeeper's children, now teenagers, were chasing her youngest son, Deo Jr., around the mango tree that had been transplanted from the old Ibadan compound. The tree had survived the journey, just like she had. Her phone buzzed. A message from Abimbola, her eldest, now 26, and running the East Africa arm of the foundation from Nairobi. "Mum, turn on the news." Ife walked inside and flicked the holoscreen to life. The headline floated in 3D above the sitting room, named after Ifeoluwa Onabanjo Bello, survivor and architect of the bill. The anchor's voice trembled with emotion. After 14 years of lobbying, midnight meetings, and Ife personally testifying before the Senate 16 times, the president signed the bill at 6:03 this morning. Child traffickers will now face the longest mandatory sentence in Nigerian history. When asked for comment, Mrs. Onabanjo Bello simply said, "The children asked me to finish what I started when I was 10. Today I kept that promise." Ife stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Bayo came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist, the same way they had for 25 years. "You did it, Ife." "No," she whispered. "We did it. All of us." That afternoon the compound filled with people. Aunt Ronk followed, carrying a cooler of her legendary pepper soup for the ancestors. Cousins Tola and Dara came with their own children, who immediately ran wild with Ife's grandchildren. Then came the ones who truly mattered, 200 former gatekeepers' children, now doctors, lawyers, designers, pilots, mothers, fathers, some with grey in their own hair, all wearing the same small enamel pin, shaped like an open gate. They had come from Ghana, Benin, Sierra Leone, even the UK and America. To celebrate the day, the country finally said, never again. At dusk, Ife stood on the small stage they had set up under the mango tree. No speech was planned. She hated speeches now, but the crowd quieted the moment she lifted her hand. I was 10, she began, voice soft, steady. I had no shoes, no voice, no tomorrow. Today I stand here because every one of you refused to let my story end in that compound. This law is not mine. It belongs to Kioma, who once objected at my wedding because she wanted more stories. It belongs to Fatima, who was rescued pregnant at 14 and is now a pediatrician. It belongs to little Daniel, who arrived mute from trauma and now sings louder than all of us. It belongs to every child still waiting behind a gate we haven't found yet. She paused. The silence was heavy, sacred. I have only one thing left to do. She stepped down, walked to the old rusted gate, the original one from the Ibadan compound. Kept all these years, now mounted on a simple concrete plinth in the center of the garden. A brass plaque beneath it read, "This gate once held a child. Today, it holds a nation's promise." Ife placed her hand on the cold metal. Then she turned to the crowd. "Who has the hammer?" A 12-year-old girl newly rescued, still shy, was pushed forward, holding a small sledgehammer wrapped in gold fabric. Ife knelt so they were eye level. "What's your name?" "Baby." "Mercy," the girl whispered. "Mercy," Ife repeated, tasting the word. "Do you want to help me finish something I started when I was your age?" Mercy nodded. Together, one woman who had survived, one child who would now never have to, they swung the hammer. Once, twice, 10 times, until the gate crumpled like paper. The crowd erupted. Phones rose. Someone started singing "Great is Thy Faithfulness" in Yoruba. Others joined. Soon the whole compound was a choir. He sat behind her, pulling her against his chest the way he had the day she said yes under this same tree. She tilted her head back to look at the stars now pricking the Lagos sky. Far away, in a small village in Oyo State, a little girl with bare feet and wide eyes was sweeping a compound at dawn when a van painted with open gates pulled up. A woman stepped out wearing an enamel pin. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Come with me. You don't belong behind gates anymore." And somewhere, in the hush between heartbeats, 10-year-old Ife, still alive inside the woman she became, finally, truly, came home. The story never ends. It only multiplies.